Tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to make a fractal noise file from scratch. So I'm going to actually use a new composition, and I'll just call it fractal noise. And just going to do the 1080 settings. So these few steps are pretty important. So the first setting is you want to make a new solid. And this solid has to be 50% gray. In order for me to ensure that I'm making a solid that's 50% gray, I'm going to click on this color, which is the background color, and under the hue, saturation, brightness, you guys see HSB in this color settings. You want to put the hue on 0, put the saturation on 0, and put the brightness on 50. That ensures that you're going to get a 50% gray color for your page. Okay, so that's number one. Once we have the 50% gray solid, I'm gonna save my document. I'm gonna go to Effects, Noise and Grain, and there's an option called Fractal Noise, and I'm gonna click on that. As when you click it, it looks like nothing basically. It works as a mask, again, between the black color and the white color, which the black reveals what's underneath it and white sort of blocks. Based on, and those are based on the layer modes that I'll be using for my project. But right now we're not going to really worry about that. I'm just going to go over the settings here and do some really basic animation before we actually add add additional items to it. So we have different types of noise, which I'll review in a second, but the very first thing that we want to do is use the evolution option to make a simple animation of this pattern. So I'll come back to these in a second, but right now I'm just going to click evolution, and by default it's set to zeros. So I'm going to go to, let's say, end of my comp, and I'm going to add 10. And when I do this, you'll see that automatic, oh God, that's very fast. Maybe don't do 10. Maybe we'll do like 3 or something. It is because my comp is kind of short, that's why. So, and still it's pretty fast, but sort of get the idea. So it's just good. Again, you can come back and go back and change it. So I'll go back to and do 1. So I have my first one is set to 0, 0, and the second one is set to 1. I'm going to change my composition setting because I have it's just really short, that's why. So I'll change my composition setting to, let's say, 10 seconds. And again, I'm going to make sure that this blue time navigator, I'm going to make sure to stretch it all the way so that it covers, the light gray covers my timeline, because if it's shorter, basically it's going to get cut off. When you start making your movie, it's just going to get cut off right here. Make sure it's light gray at the bottom, and I'm going to actually move my keyframe towards the end. So now you can see that it's just a lot. So hang on, let me see. Yeah, make sure you also expand your layer. So now you see that it's just much softer, much slower animation. I'm gonna go back here, and actually now I can do like 5 higher number, so you can actually see some movement. So not very exciting, is it? All the things I showed you from those presets were a lot more exciting than this, right? But this has a lot of potential. So I'm going to go over now. That potential is connected to the type of noise and the fractal type. So from here, if I choose my fractal noise, if I change it to block, automatically the pattern is changed to like block shapes. Also, if I come back here, and each one of these gives me like a different look. Come back here, let's say I choose like max, I get a completely different result. And in a second, I'll show you why that becomes really interesting. And you can play with the contrast. You can click with the play with the brightness. You can invert. And one of the things that is really make this whole thing powerful, under the transform tool, if you uncheck the uniform scaling, you can actually have this completely like scale up and sort of have this kind of a cool animation going here. And actually, I'm gonna go back, and all these changes that I'm making, it's called they're live, which means that I can constantly go back to the setting and update. Like for example, I was like, oh, I don't like how fast this is moving. I go to evolution, I change it to 3. So now it moves a lot slower. So again, the beauty of this is that you can constantly go back in there and make specific whatever change you want to make it large cubes, small cubes, or even have that pattern that I initially had back. So here before I had the basic pattern and I had the linear, so it was a completely different look, right? That I just created based on what I just did over here. So it's kind of pays off to kind of play around with some of these things on your own. And I'll just show you one quick thing that how this becomes something that you can actually use for your project. So let's say I have this one picture. If I bring it in, and I'm just going to use my layer modes, and I can just sort of see it. Shift plus. You can kind of combine like your top layer with the bottom layer and sort of have the animation reveal or sort of interact with the animation. The picture, I have a static picture, but I can actually totally have these interact with each other. So, and let's say if you have a video or whatever movement, that can really create some interesting, can have some really interesting results. So I'm going to actually go back to my effects here, and I'm going to turn off the photo. So let's just make something that looks like maybe a fog, right? Like so because I want to have it added to the landscape and have it just move over the landscape, right? So again, I can go back to my settings and just choose change the fractal type and sort of get it back to this level. And one thing that I'm going to do is go. So again, you constantly have to go back and forth between the scale, the width scale, and the height scale, right? So if we think of fog is horizontal, right? So I need to really stretch this out horizontally, because, right? So versus, let's say, if you want to create fire, right? Because fire moves up vertical. So right now we're just going to keep a really simple animation based on like fog, and I'm going to move this out. Again, you can, even though this is locked at 600, you can go and really push it out. So it's a little foggy, right? A little foggy. And again, you just keep going back and forth. Do you want it to be a little lighter? Do you want it to be a little darker? Is it like a stormy type of a fog? So then that comes to you manipulating the contrast and the brightness, right? So let's say, I mean, still there's some fine tuning involved here, but let's say I'm happy with this, you know, for now it's good. Again, I can always go back and fine tune it further. And I have my picture here, and we could, again, I always use my layer modes. And you guys remember what the shortcut key was? Shift plus and Shift- 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 and Shift This probably is like an overlay or soft light. Yeah, overlay, soft light. So I'm gonna kind of do a very basic animation of the photograph too, because otherwise it's just gonna look weird. I'm just gonna zoom in on the photo. And so under the transform tool, I'm gonna make sure I to go to the very beginning of your timeline, letter I on your keypad. So I'm gonna do the scale and the anchor point, animate the scale and the anchor point. So I'm gonna have to scale it up pretty good and move it up. And then maybe over here, I'll just go back, oops, I'll just go and drop the scale down. This screen. Oops, no. So now, probably need for it to get blurred a little bit. But you can see for something that's really static, right? I mean, it kind of adds a bit of a life to it. And of course, with this one, I feel like it needs to be a little brighter. Now you can see like how this creates these shadow kind of things on the asphalt, right? I mean, literally, I made this animation with like nothing. I have a static photo, and I have this thing that I just created based on dark values and light values. Again, there is some fine tuning involved, especially here. And of course, once you have an animation that you're kind of happy with, well, I mean, you can go and add other things to it. For example, I can come here and say, you know what? I need to add a bit of a blue tone to it. Because usually, you know, with sky, you know, with the clouds, the gray would pick up the reflection of the sky, which is blue, right? So you can always do like either hue saturation is always a good one. And you can kind of fine tune it further that way. So of course that's not a good color for what I'm doing. So let me stop. So basically that is it. This is how you create